In September of 1767, a trembling clerk at the Annapolis Customs House made an announcement that froze every man in the room. The slave ship Lord Ligonier had arrived with one survivor who refused to give a name, refused to kneel, and refused to acknowledge any owner. He spoke only 6 words in Mandinka, repeated again and again. By the 3rd day, 3 overseers were injured, 2 men left the colony entirely, and a secret order was issued. The African must be broken or buried. The White Society of Maryland whispered that the man was cursed. They had no idea the truth was far more dangerous. By the end of winter, his name would be known across 4 colonies, and 31 plantation owners would swear publicly that they feared him more than rebellion itself. What really happened on that ship? Who was this man they called Kunta Kinte? And what did he do that terrified everyone who witnessed it? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. In the dry season of 1766, when the harmattan winds swept red dust across the riverbanks of Juffure, a boy named Kunta Kinte ran barefoot across the hardened earth with a speed that startled even the elders. He was lean, sharp-eyed, and carried himself with a confidence that made other boys step aside without thinking. His father, Amaro, often watched him from the shade of their hut and whispered that the ancestors had touched the boy's shoulders before birth. What Amaro did not know, what no one in the village yet understood, was that a storm beyond any ancestor's vision had already begun its crawl toward them. The world of Juffure thrummed with a rhythm older than empire. Women pounded millet outside the huts, their wooden pestles rising and falling in mesmerizing unity. Smoke drifted from cooking fires, carrying scents of rice, groundnuts, and fish pulled fresh from the river. Children chased goats across the dusty clearing. Traders from upriver passed through with cloth and salt, sharing news of distant kingdoms slowly colliding with the ambitions of Europeans who built forts along the coast like teeth waiting to clamp shut. The village elders spoke of treaties in gold and the strange hunger of white men who measured everything, even people, in weight. Kunta, still only around 10 years old, saw none of the shadows in those stories. He raced through the forest chasing monkeys, practiced with his sling until he could strike a mango from a branch, and sat at his father's feet absorbing every word about Mandinka honor. A man must know his name, Amaro often told him. A man must carry it as shield and weapon. Your name is your first truth, Amaro said one evening as the sun bled into the river. If you lose it, you lose yourself. Kunta repeated the lesson quietly, letting the syllables of his own name settle into his bones. He felt proud, unbreakable even though he could never articulate why. He was Mandinka, son of a proud griot lineage, apprentice to a history older than the kingdoms around them. He absorbed these teachings the way the river absorbed moonlight, fully without resistance. Yet the village held its secrets. Men returned from hunting with stories they whispered only in corners. A caravan had been attacked. A young woman from the next village had disappeared. Strangers with pale skin had been seen speaking to slavers near the coast. Some said they carried iron shackles meant not for criminals but for capturing healthy young men. The elders dismissed the rumors in public, but their eyes betrayed unease. Kunta sensed the tension long before he understood it. He saw the way Amaro scanned the horizon at dusk. He saw his mother Binta gather him closer when distant drums echoed in unfamiliar rhythms. And he overheard one of the elders say, "Times are shifting. The rivers are listening." On the morning everything changed, Kunta rose before dawn to fetch water. The air was cool and soft with river mist, and frogs croaked from the reeds. He lowered the gourd into the water and watched ripples widen across the surface. A bird called out sharply as if warning him. Kunta turned, expecting a hyena. Instead, he saw a line of footprints pressed into the mud, 6 pairs, heavy, unfamiliar, and fresh. He followed them a few paces, curiosity tugging him deeper into the trees. But as the forest thickened, the atmosphere shifted. The usual sense of damp bark and flowering vines were drowned by something metallic, almost bitter. And then he heard it, a branch snapping under deliberate weight. Another footstep. A whisper in a language he had never heard. Kunta froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. But before fear could root itself, the sounds faded, swallowed by the trees. He backed away slowly, gripping the water gourd in both hands, and hurried back toward the village. He said nothing, not because he lacked courage but because he did not yet understand what he had sensed in the woods. And he would not understand until it was too late. By midday, traders arrived with news that shattered the calm. White men had landed farther up the river. They carried muskets, cloth, and promises of trade, but also chains. More unsettling, 2 Mandinka boys from a village west of Juffure had vanished without a trace. Their fathers had searched the forest for 3 nights before finding blood on the leaves and a fragment of rope half buried in the dirt. Whether the boys were dead or taken, no one knew. That evening, the elders met beneath the great baobab tree. The lantern light flickered across their carved faces as they debated precautions. Should the young men avoid the forest? Should they move the livestock closer to the huts? Should they still allow traders inside the village walls? They did not reach a decision. Fear clouded ancient wisdom. Kunta sat silently near the tree's roots, watching the elders argue with rising impatience. He felt a strange fire inside him, not fear but defiance. Whatever danger lurked beyond the river, Kunta believed it could not touch him. He was Mandinka, son of Amaro. He knew who he was. But the narrator sees what he cannot. What Kunta did not know was that as the elders argued, a Portuguese captain named Manuel Ferreira was already mapping the route to Juffure on a piece of parchment aboard a ship anchored in the Gambia River's mouth. Ferreira had heard rumors of a Mandinka boy with fearless eyes. A strong one, a healthy one, a profitable one, and he was coming for him. The moon rose red over Juffure on the night everything unraveled, hanging low in the sky like a wounded eye. The villagers believed such a moon meant the ancestors walked close to the living. But the truth, far colder and far more dangerous, crept toward them from the river. 6 men in dark clothing carrying sacks, ropes, and iron shackles wrapped in cloth to keep them from clinking. They moved with the ease of hunters who had stalked this path before. Kunta Kinte could not sleep that night. He lay awake listening to the soft snores of his younger brothers, the distant shuffle of goats, and the rhythmic thrum of the nighttime drums from the neighboring village. Something in the air felt wrong, too still, too quiet, as if the wind itself held its breath. He rose quietly and stepped outside. The village slept under the red glow, huts casting long shadows across the dusty clearing. Kunta walked toward the edge of the forest, a place where he often went when his thoughts felt loud. But tonight his feet slowed. The scent of the forest, usually rich with earth and flowering vines, felt sharp, metallic, unnerving. A twig snapped. Not the skitter of a monkey. Not the soft tread of a grazing goat. A heavy step. A deliberate one. Kunta's muscles tensed. He crouched behind a bush, peering into the darkness. The trees swayed slightly and figures emerged, tall, broad men with cloth wrapped over their faces and glints of metal at their belts. 3 Mandinka collaborators led the way, whispering directions. Behind them, white men followed, their pale skin reflecting the moonlight like bone. Kunta's breath locked in his chest. He had heard stories of raiders, slavers who stalked the forest searching for the strongest young men. But stories felt different when the danger breathed the same air as you. He stepped back slowly. A stone shifted under his heel. One of the raiders turned sharply. "Wait," the man hissed. Kunta bolted. He sprinted toward the village, sand spraying behind him. The raiders chased, their heavy boots pounding the earth. Kunta's heart hammered in his ears. He reached the first hut and shouted, "Father! Wake! Wake!" Doors swung open. Torches flickered. Women screamed. Men grabbed spears and shields, but the raiders were already upon them. A whistle cut through the air. Gunshot. The explosion tore open the night. Kunta stumbled back as a man beside him dropped, chest torn by the blast. The village erupted into chaos. Children cried. Goats scattered. Flames from tipped-over lanterns licked the dry grass. Amaro burst from the hut, spear raised. "Kunta!" A raider swung his club. Amaro blocked the first blow but staggered under the second. Kunta lunged toward him, but strong arms clamped around his torso from behind, lifting him off the ground. He thrashed wildly. "Let go! Let me go!" The man holding him grunted as Kunta's heel drove into his thigh. Kunta twisted, swinging his elbow backward, striking the man's ribs. Another raider grabbed his arms. A third struck him across the back with the butt of a musket. Pain exploded down his spine. His knees buckled. Still he fought. He spat. But he refused to stop. One of the white men crouched beside him, panting from the chase. "Strong one," he muttered. "Very strong. Captain Ferreira will pay well." Kunta didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone and the hunger behind the man's eyes. A rope tightened around his wrists. Another coiled around his ankles. As they dragged him across the dirt, Kunta clawed at the earth, leaving long trails in the soil. His breaths came sharp and fast. He saw his mother, Binta, reaching for him, screaming his name. 2 raiders held her back. He saw Amaro rise again, spear lifted, but the musket flashed and the blast sent him crashing into the dust. "Father!" Kunta's throat tore with the scream. But the raiders didn't stop. They dragged him toward the trees as the village burned behind them. He twisted his neck, fighting to look back, memorizing every hut, every flame, every face. His world was being ripped away and he knew it. He feared he would never see it again. His mother collapsed to her knees. His brothers huddled in terror. The red moon watched in silence. At the forest's edge, the Portuguese captain stepped forward. Manuel Ferreira, boots polished, coat perfectly pressed, eyes cold with calculation. He examined Kunta as if appraising a horse. "He will fetch a high price," Ferreira said. "Bind him tightly. We sail at first light." Kunta did not know the man's words, but he understood chains. He understood the way the raiders smiled when they fastened the iron cuffs around his wrists. As the gag tightened over his mouth, Kunta met Ferreira's gaze, defiant, unbroken, burning with a rage beyond his years. The captain hesitated, unsettled by the fire in the boy's eyes. Kunta Kinte did not bow. Not even then. What none of them knew, not Ferreira, not the raiders, not even the trembling collaborators, was that this boy's name, carried silently through the trees and across the river, would one day ignite rebellions, shape generations, and haunt the very nation that thought it owned him. And the night was far from over. The river swallowed Juffure behind them long before dawn, but Kunta Kinte felt it even when he could no longer see the shoreline. He lay in the bottom of a narrow boat, wrists and ankles raw beneath the ropes, gag bitter in his mouth. Every breath stung his ribs. Above, the sky paled from black to bruised purple as the raiders ferried their human cargo toward the waiting ship. The smell hit him before the sight did. Rot, sweat, feces, vomit. A sour, thick stench that seemed to cling to the air like a curse. As the boat rounded a bend, Kunta lifted his head and saw it. The massive shape of a wooden ship anchored like some monstrous insect on the water's surface. Its masts rose into the sky like skeletal arms. The hull was stained and scarred, pocked by years of voyages and storms. On its side, painted letters spelled out a name he could not read, Lord Ligonier. The raiders rowed close. Voices shouted in a language he did not understand. Ropes were thrown. Ladders dropped. Kunta was hauled upright. "On your feet," one of the raiders hissed. His legs trembled but held. The gag choked his protests. His wrists burned. Yet his eyes stayed sharp, scanning, measuring, refusing to yield. Behind him, men and women sobbed, prayed, or stared blankly at the river. A younger boy whimpered, "Mother? Mother?" in a voice too small for the horror surrounding them. They were driven up the ladder like livestock. On deck, white men in stained coats moved with practiced efficiency. A man with ink-stained fingers clutched a ledger, calling out numbers and descriptions as if counting sacks of grain. Male strong approximately 18, marked grade A. 2 females young. 1 boy. The clerk's eyes landed on Kunta. He hesitated. "This one looks troublesome." Captain Manuel Ferreira stepped into view, the morning light gleaming off the brass buttons of his coat. He studied Kunta with a cool, appraising stare. "Troublesome pays better in the islands," Ferreira said. "Buyers want strength. They think they can break spirit with the whip." His lips curled slightly. "They rarely understand what cannot be broken." The clerk wrote quickly. "Strong Mandinka male," he murmured. "Eyes like fire." Kunta did not know the words, but he recognized the tone. Ownership. He wanted to spit, to curse, to shout his name so loudly the river itself would remember it, but the gag held him silent. The prisoners were driven toward an open hatch in the deck. A wave of heat hit them. A foetid, suffocating humidity rose from the darkness below. As Kunta was pushed forward, he heard the sounds, moans, coughing, chains scraping against wood. The air tasted like rust and despair. They descended into the hold. The space below deck was scarcely tall enough to stand in. Wooden beams pressed low overhead. The walls sweated moisture and filth. Bodies were chained in rows, lying shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, pressed so tightly together it was difficult to breathe without touching another's skin. Rats darted along the edges, fearless and fat. A crewman unknotted Kunta's gag, then shoved him down. Chains snapped closed around his ankles. Iron bit into his skin. "Do not move unless told," the man growled. "You shout, you die. You fight, you die." Kunta sucked in a ragged breath, throat burning. "My name is Kunta Kinte," he rasped. The crewman blinked. "What?" Kunta repeated it more steadily this time. "Kunta Kinte, Mandinka, son of Amaro." The man snorted. "On this ship you have no name." He straightened. "You are cargo." He walked away. Kunta lay in the dark, the weight of other bodies pressing against him. He could feel the tremble in the boy chained beside him, heard the quiet whimpering of a woman further down the row. Above them, footsteps thudded as the crew prepared to set sail. Somewhere outside, a gull shrieked. The ship groaned as it shifted with the tide. Then the hatch slammed shut. Darkness crushed them. For a while, there was only breathing, hundreds of lungs dragging in the foul air, trying to find enough oxygen to stay alive. Then voices rose. Low at first. Prayers in Wolof, Mandinka, Fula, tongues braided together in desperation. Some begged the ancestors to wake from their sleep. Others asked the river spirits to overturn the ship and send them to the bottom of the sea rather than carry them into a world they did not know. A voice to Kunta's left whispered, "Brother, what village?" "Juffure," Kunta answered. "I am from upriver. They took us at the market." Pause. "I am Sani." "I am Kunta Kinte," he said again as if the repetition could anchor him. "You think they will return us?" Sani's question trembled. Kunta closed his eyes. He saw flames in Juffure, his father falling, his mother screaming. He knew the answer in his bones. "No." Sani swallowed hard. "Then we must live long enough to revenge ourselves." The ship lurched as the sails caught wind. Chains rattled. Someone vomited. Someone else began to cry out for water, voice hoarse. A crewman above beat the deck with a club. "Quiet down there." The cries did not stop. They simply grew softer, turned inward. Days blurred into a suffocating rhythm. The hold baked in the heat. Men and women lay in their own sweat and waste. Food came in wooden bowls, mash and water ladled out with indifference. Some refused to eat. Those were beaten, forced, or left to weaken. Kunta refused at first. He turned his head away when the bowl reached him. "I will not live as their animal." Sani hissed, "Kunta, eat." A crewman watching from the ladder snarled. He descended into the hold, boots thudding on the ladder rungs, and seized Kunta by the hair. "You eat," he snarled, shoving the bowl toward his face. "Captain says strong ones must live." Kunta stared back, eyes burning. Better to die as Mandinka than live as nothing. The man did not understand the words, but he understood defiance. The blow came without warning. A fist cracked into Kunta's jaw, snapping his head back. Stars burst across his vision. The bowl clattered to the floor. Another punch. Then a kick. Kunta gasped, ribs blazing with pain. "Eat or I cut your throat and throw you overboard," the crewman said. He raised the bowl again, pressing it to Kunta's lips. This time, Kunta swallowed, not out of submission but out of calculation. Rage seethed beneath the surface, but another thought rose alongside it. Survive. Survive long enough to see where they were taking him. Survive long enough to fight. He met Sani's gaze afterward. "I will eat," he murmured. "But I will not forget." "What?" Sani asked. "My name," Kunta said. "They may chain my body, but not my name." What none of them knew, none of the men chained in that dark hold, none of the crew walking above, not even Captain Ferreira pacing his cabin with his maps and ledgers, was that rumors of this voyage, of this ship, and of a Mandinka who would not bow, would one day reach across oceans and centuries, carried in whispers, songs, and stories. But first the sea would test them. The worst of the journey had not yet begun. By the time the Lord Ligonier scraped into the harbor at Annapolis in early September of 1767, the enslaved men and women in the hold had become shadows of themselves. Fever had taken some. Starvation had hollowed others. Sani coughed blood for 2 days before falling silent altogether, his body stiffening against Kunta's side. The crew dragged him away without ceremony. Kunta watched them go, jaw clenched, eyes fever bright. He whispered the boy's name softly in Mandinka, because someone had to remember it. When the hatch finally opened, sunlight exploded into the darkness. The prisoners squinted, covering their eyes with trembling hands. Crewmen barked orders, dragging them one by one into the open air. Many stumbled, legs weak from weeks in chains. Others gasped at the sudden rush of clean air, as if drowning lungs had been granted one last breath. Kunta was hauled up by 2 men. His ankles scraped against the wooden ladder. As he stepped onto the deck, the harbor stretched before him. Ships bobbing at their moorings, white men shouting orders, carts rumbling along the pier, gulls screaming overhead. The world felt loud, chaotic, nothing like the river sounds of Juffure. A group of merchants gathered near the dockside, quills and ledgers in hand. They eyed the Africans with mixtures of fascination, greed, and thinly veiled fear. One murmured, "Mandinka stock. Strong. Worth the trouble." Another muttered, "If they do not break first." Captain Ferreira stepped forward, tipping his hat in greeting. "Gentlemen, finest cargo we have brought in months." Healthy, resilient, though still standing at least. His smile never reached his eyes. The buyers inspected the prisoners like livestock. They prodded limbs, checked teeth, demanded the men walk forward and back. One grabbed Kunta's chin, turning his face left and right. Strong shoulders, the buyer noted, but the eyes, defiant. He refuses to speak English, Ferreira warned. Refuses or does not know yet? The buyer asked. Ferreira's lips tightened. Refuses. The buyer stepped back. Not worth the trouble. The proud ones break messily. Another merchant, John Waller of Virginia, a man with a polished cane and a voice like melted wax, approached next. He did not touch Kunta at first. He simply observed him, tilting his head slightly, as if studying a rare animal he could not decide whether to tame or avoid. What is his name? Waller asked. Ferreira opened his ledger. We call him number 11. Waller raised an eyebrow. I asked for his name. Ferreira hesitated. He glanced at Kunta, then whispered, He claims it is Kunta Kinte. Waller repeated the name slowly. Kunta Kinte. He tapped his cane on the deck. Unacceptable. My property will not share the names of savages. Kunta understood only the disdain, not the words. But when Waller reached forward to inspect his shoulder, Kunta jerked away, eyes blazing. The merchant stepped back. He fights, someone hissed. Rebellious, another muttered. Break him on arrival, a third advised. Break him hard. Waller smiled thinly. Oh, I intend to. The transaction was swift. Coin exchanged hands. The enslaved were chained in groups and led toward horse-drawn wagons. Kunta, bound to 3 other men, stumbled as the chain jerked forward. He turned once, just once, to look back at the ship. Some part of him wanted to burn it into memory so that if he ever found the strength to return to Africa, he would curse this vessel by name and watch it rot in harbor mud. The journey to Waller's plantation lasted days. They traveled through thick woods, over rolling hills, past small towns where children stared wide-eyed at the chained procession. At night, the newly enslaved slept under guard, wrists bound, feet shackled. White patrollers circled the campfires with muskets resting on their shoulders. During one pause in the journey, a driver, older, with tired eyes and calloused hands, approached the chained group. His voice was low, tense, and laced with an accent similar to theirs. You must do as they say, he murmured, or they will kill you. Kunta met the man's gaze. I will not bow. You must, the man insisted. Your life depends on it. My name is Kunta Kinte. That is all I have. The driver's eyes softened. Then keep it in your heart. But speak carefully. They listened for pride like dogs listen for prey. The next morning, as the wagons rolled into the clearing of Waller's plantation, the enslaved workers paused to stare. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the big house. Cotton fields stretched out like endless white seas. Overseers rode on horseback, whips slung over their shoulders. Kunta stepped onto the soil with silent fury burning inside him. The plantation driver assigned to his training waited for him, a wiry, dark-skinned man with violin-calloused fingers and a weary but perceptive gaze. I am called Fiddler, he said quietly, eyes darting toward the overseer. I teach you what keeps you alive. Kunta studied him. For the first time since Juffure, he saw someone who might understand a fraction of the fire inside him. Fiddler sighed. You got the look of them Africans that refuse to break. Pray you do not die for it. Kunta lifted his chin. I am Kunta Kinte. He spoke the words not to Fiddler, not to Waller, not to the sky above, but to himself. Fiddler nodded slowly. Then hold tight to that, boy. A name is a dangerous thing in this place. What Kunta did not know, what even Fiddler dared not imagine, was how many men on this very plantation had already whispered his name before he arrived. The stories of the unbroken Mandinka had spread. Even the overseers felt something uneasy in the air. And Kunta's presence had only just begun to shift the balance of power. The first week on Waller's plantation taught Kunta more about captivity than the entire Middle Passage. The ship had chained his body. The plantation attempted to chain his spirit. Every morning before dawn, the horn sounded, dragging the enslaved from their cabins into the fields. Cotton picking, hauling, clearing brush, labor that bent the back and drained the soul. But Kunta watched everything. He watched how the overseers paced their horses in repetitive arcs, how the drivers passed silent signals between rows, how the older slaves bent their heads low not from weakness but from habit grown from knowing too well what defiance cost. And he watched Fiddler, the man tasked with breaking him in. Fiddler walked with a cautious step, always alert, always listening. One evening after the fields emptied, Fiddler approached Kunta with a bowl of cornbread and smoked salt pork. "Eat," he murmured. "You need strength." Kunta said nothing. He studied Fiddler's face, the fatigue in his eyes, the tightness in his jaw whenever an overseer passed. Fiddler lowered his voice. "You think only you hate this place? Boy, this land has swallowed whole generations." He nudged the bowl closer. You stay alive." Kunta took the food. Not because he obeyed, but because he sensed truth in Fiddler's voice. And because hunger had become a clawing thing inside his belly. Still, he spoke with the dignity of Juffure. "I will not be a slave." Fiddler exhaled sharply. "Then you better learn the rules fast. Even lions get tamed if they growl too loud." But Kunta was no lion to be tamed. And the overseers soon discovered this. On the third morning, an overseer named Buckley rode by and barked, "You, boy, move faster." Kunta kept his pace steady. Buckley's whip sliced the air. The lash struck Kunta's shoulder. Kunta turned, eyes smoldering. Buckley hesitated. A moment too long. A moment that revealed fear. Fiddler rushed in, placing himself between them. "Sir, I beg," he knew. "He learning. He will do better." Buckley glared. "See that he does. Or I break him myself." When Buckley rode off, Fiddler grabbed Kunta's arm. "You got death in your eyes, boy. Keep that to yourself." But Kunta could not hide that fire, and it did not take long before whispers began drifting through the slave quarters. "He the Mandinka that fought on the ship," someone whispered. "Say he bit a man's ear off. He wrestled 2 patrollers barehanded. They say he cursed the captain with African magic." Kunta ignored most of it, but he could not ignore what he saw behind those whispers. Hope, quiet, trembling hope. One night, long after the overseers retired, Kunta stepped out to wash his face in the water barrel. Moonlight spilled across the yard. Crickets hummed. The scent of clay and damp earth clung to the air. A man stepped out from behind the tool shed, face half-shadowed. "You Kunta Kinte?" Kunta stiffened. "Who asks?" "Name's Leja." Another figure emerged. Then another. For in total, men with hardened eyes and scarred hands. Men who looked like they had spent their entire lives waiting for something that had never arrived. "You got spirit?" Leja said. "We need men like you." "For what?" Kunta asked. Leja stepped closer, lowering his voice. "To leave this place." Kunta's pulse quickened. "Escape." "Not just that." Leja glanced toward the cabins. "They're a group of us, from 3 plantations. Been passing messages for months. They're a trail through the swamps patrollers don't know. If enough of us go, they cannot catch us. We got a guide," another added. "Knows the marshes like he born inside them." Kunta listened, heart pounding, the memory of his father's blood shadowing his thoughts. "We leave at harvest," Leja whispered. "Join us. A Mandinka like you they follow." Kunta stepped back. Something inside him recoiled. Not from fear, he knew fear well by now, but from compromise. "What you ask?" Kunta murmured. Leja exchanged glances with the others. "We move quiet. We blend in. We do what they say until the night come. That how we survive." Kunta's face hardened. "You want me to bow?" Leja's jaw twitched. "We want you to live." "I will not live as a slave." "You think we want that?" Leja snapped softly. "But pride get you whipped, get you chained, get someone else killed." Kunta shook his head. "A man must remember who he is." "We remember," Leja whispered bitterly. "But memory don't stop bullets." As they slipped back into the shadows, the last man turned and said, "Think on it. The overseers watch you. They know you dangerous." Kunta already knew. He saw the way the overseers studied him. The way Buckley's hand hovered near the whip whenever he passed. The way Waller's thin smile tightened whenever Kunta held his head high. Something was shifting on the plantation. Something the white men sensed even if they could not name it. A force unsettling their routines, disrupting their control. That force was Kunta. But what Kunta did not know, what none of the enslaved men whispering in the moonlit shadows understood, was that someone else watched him. Someone who lingered behind fences, behind porch rails, behind the corners of the big house. Someone who saw in Kunta not hope, not power, but threat. The overseers had begun to discuss him at night, and their plans did not include letting him survive. The first time Kunta ran, the sky was split open with thunder. Rain hammered the earth in thick sheets, turning the fields into rivers of mud. The overseers, fooled by the storm's chaos, sought shelter beneath the storage shed, drinking and cursing the weather. Fiddler sent Kunta to the smokehouse for salt pork, knowing well what task he was truly giving him. "Storm loud," Fiddler murmured, pretending to adjust a sack of grain. Dogs cannot smell so good in rain. Kunta's eyes flashed. Fiddler didn't look at him directly. Wind, hide your footsteps. Go if you go. He didn't need to say more. Kunta slipped behind the smokehouse, darted through the wet brush and vanished into the treeline. Branches whipped his face. Mud sucked at his feet. But he ran with the memory of Juffure burning in his chest, with Saini's ghost breathing at his heels, with the roar of freedom calling him deeper into the storm. He ran until his lungs were knives. He ran until the plantation disappeared behind a curtain of rain. He ran, but the patrollers were still faster. They found him at dawn, cornered near a fallen oak, shivering and exhausted. The dogs growled. A gun cocked. Get up, the lead patroller barked. Kunta didn't move. A blow from a musket but slammed into his ribs. He crumpled. But he did not break. When they dragged him back, Waller's face paled. Again? He muttered, almost incredulous. Just 3 days on my land and already he runs? Buckley grinned. Permission to break him proper, sir? Waller hesitated. He feared something in Kunta, something unspoken, something beyond beatings and chains. But fear was not something a white master could show. Do what you must. The punishment was swift, painful. But the narrator will not linger there. It is enough to say that when Kunta awoke, blood matted his back, and the world swam in waves of red and black. Fiddler sat beside him, face streaked with worry and resignation. You near got yourself killed, he whispered. Boy, you ain't special here. They break strong men every day. Kunta's jaw tightened. Not me. Fiddler's voice trembled. They will try again. They will fail again. Fiddler closed his eyes. You got no sense. But you got heart. The second escape came weeks later. This time, Kunta studied the patrollers' rotations, counted how many minutes Buckley spent drinking behind the barn, watched how the dogs slept lightly when fed midday scraps but deeply when fed bones. He moved with caution, with strategy, not with desperation. He stole a small knife from the blacksmith's shed, hid it beneath loose floorboards in his cabin, and waited. One night, when the moon was thin and the air thick with humidity, he slipped from the cabin window, hugging the shadows of the quarters. The knife glinted faintly in his hand. He crossed the fields silently, reached the fence, climbed it, and dropped to the other side. The woods called him forward. A path he had memorized in his mind unfolded before him. Then a voice cut through the dark. Where you think you going, Mandinka? Kunta spun. Buckley sat on horseback not 10 yards away, rifle resting casually on his thigh, eyes glinting with triumph. You not the first to try, Buckley drawled. But you might be the last. 3 patrollers emerged behind him. Kunta bolted anyway. Buckley's shout tore across the field. After him. The chase was brutal. Branches tore his skin. Rocks bruised his feet. The dogs howled as they caught his scent. Kunta leapt over fallen logs, pushed through thorn bushes, sprinted until his chest felt like it would split apart. But he stumbled. A root twisted beneath his foot. Pain shot up his leg. He fell hard, the knife skidding out of reach. A dog lunged, teeth snapping inches from his face. A patroller pinned him with a boot, pressing down until Kunta gasped. Should kill you right here, the man snarled. Buckley strode forward. Not yet. He crouched beside Kunta, breath sour with tobacco and rage. You think you better than the rest? Buckley hissed. You ain't. You a beast. And beasts get broken. No matter how much they struck him, no matter how long they dragged him back in chains, Kunta never repeated the words Buckley wanted him to say. He never said Toby. He never said master. He never said I submit. What no one understood, not Buckley, not Waller, not even the men who feared the fire in his eyes, was that Kunta's defiance was not merely stubbornness. It was identity. It was lineage. It was the echo of the ancestors walking with him even as his body bent under the weight of captivity. The third escape attempt came months later. Kunta planned it with the precision of a hunter. He hid water in gourds, memorized the swamp paths, made small alliances with enslaved men who longed for freedom but lacked opportunity. But on the night he prepared to slip into the marsh, something unexpected happened. A voice whispered behind him. You run tonight? Kunta turned sharply. Legia stepped from the shadows, face stern. We saw you move supplies. You think you move alone? You think we not watching the Mandinka boy who stir up hope? Kunta said nothing. Legia's jaw clenched. You run alone, you die alone. Kunta's reply was soft. Better to die free. Legia grabbed his arm. Not if your death killed the rest of us. But before Kunta could answer, a twig snapped in the dark. Then another. Then another. Buckley emerged from the opposite shadows, rifle aimed. Thought you slick, didn't you? The patrollers closed in. Legia vanished like smoke, leaving Kunta surrounded. Later, the overseers would brag that they had broken him that day, that the Mandinka spirit had finally cracked. But Fiddler, who carried Kunta back to the quarters, knew differently. This ain't the end, Fiddler whispered, voice thick with grief. I can see it in your eyes. They can't break what born unbroken. What Kunta did not know, what even the overseers discussing him late at night did not realize, was that after these 3 attempts, Waller had made a decision. A quiet one. A deadly one. A decision that would change everything on the plantation. After the 3rd escape, a stillness settled over Waller's plantation that was not peace. It was the quiet of a battlefield before the next volley of gunfire. The enslaved moved more cautiously. Overseers watched more closely. And in the center of it all, like a coal that refused to go out, was Kunta Kinte. He walked with a limp now. The punishment from the last capture had left his right foot damaged, tendons twisted, pain flaring with each step. Some would have taken that as defeat. The overseers certainly did. They smirked when he staggered, satisfied that at last they had carved their power into his flesh. But Kunta's eyes never lost their fire. He moved slower, yes, but he watched more. He saw how Buckley's temper grew shorter, how the man snapped at slaves and whites alike, drinking more heavily in the evenings. He noticed when a new overseer arrived, a man named Vaughn with pale hair, thin lips, and a habit of touching the pistol at his hip every few minutes as if reassuring himself of its presence. Vaughn did not shout as much as Buckley. He did not need to. Silence clung to him like a second skin. The enslaved learned quickly that his quiet was more dangerous than Buckley's noise. One afternoon, as Kunta dragged sacks toward the barn, he passed close enough to overhear Vaughn speaking with a patroller near the stable. You bring me any runaways, Vaughn murmured, voice low, and I pay you more than the county ever would. The patroller spat tobacco into the dirt. You want them alive or dead? Vaughn's gaze slid toward the fields, where black bodies bent under white sun. His mouth twitched. Alive fetches more. But a lesson in blood is sometimes worth the price. The patroller chuckled. Plenty men looking to sell information. Plenty boys thinking about running. Bring me their names, Vaughn said. We will make examples. What Vaughn did not know was that the wind carried his words farther than he realized, and that Kunta had learned to listen to the wind. That night, in the cramped, dim light of the cabin, Kunta repeated the conversation to Fiddler. They hunt us not only for master, Kunta said quietly. They hunt us to line their own pockets. Fiddler stared at the dirt floor, jaw tight. Always been that way. Overseers get paid in control. Patrollers get paid in fear. They sell our bodies twice over. Then there is war, Kunta murmured. Fiddler looked up sharply. War get men killed, boy. Kunta's gaze hardened. We already dying. The silent war did not begin with a scream. It began with a missing man. His name was Jared, a wiry field hand from the neighboring plantation. He had whispered to Legia that he knew a path through the marshes that the dogs would not track. One evening he came to Waller's quarters to share news of patrol routes. He never made it back. The next morning, word spread quietly. Jared's body had been found near the creek, neck broken, wrists bound. The official story was that he had attacked a patroller. The enslaved did not believe it. Vaughn set him up. Legia hissed to Kunta behind the smokehouse. He offers coins for runaways, then kills them to earn favor with the masters. Kunta's jaw clenched. Then they will do the same to me. Not if you stop stirring up trouble, Legia shot back. You a marked man now. Patrollers say your name like a curse. Vaughn watch you like a hawk circling a dying animal. Kunta's response was calm, almost unnervingly so. Let him watch. Legia threw his hands up. Stubborn African. You think you a story already? Kunta did not answer. But he was beginning to understand something deeper than pride. His defiance had become more than his own. It had become symbol. And symbols were the first things tyrants tried to destroy. Days slid into one another. Vaughn adjusted the work rotations. He separated those he considered troublemakers. Kunta, Legia, a woman named Amma who had once struck a driver with a hoe, from younger, more impressionable slaves. He called it discipline. The enslaved knew it for what it was, isolation. Fiddler, who had once moved freely between the big house and the quarters, now found doors closing more frequently. Master Waller say the African's influence infecting the others, Fiddler muttered one evening as he tuned his fiddle. He say you bring unrest. Like unrest ain't been woven into this soil since the first man chained here. Kunta's eyes narrowed. They fear me. They fear what you make others remember, Fiddler corrected. Remembering is dangerous here. They want men to forget they was ever something else. A week later, the first real blow of the silent war landed. Amma's child fell sick. Fever burned the boy's skin, eyes clouding. Amma begged for a doctor. Waller sent word. The boy was property, not priority. Amma worked anyway, hands trembling as she picked cotton, eyes constantly drawn toward the cabin where her child lay gasping. During midday break, Kunta approached her. Go to your child, he said. I will take your row. Amma shook her head. Overseer, see he whip us both. Kunta held her gaze. Let him. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Two people caught in a system designed to erase every trace of their humanity. Amma's eyes glistened. She dropped her sack and ran. Kunta stepped into her row and bent his back. Vaughn saw. By sundown, Amma's child was dead. She rocked the small body in her arms, wailing. Vaughn ordered everyone into the yard. The field hand Amma abandoned her work, he said, voice cold. This cannot stand. The enslaved gathered, hearts hammering. Evening light painted the scene in gold that felt like mockery. Amma stood shaking, eyes swollen, hands still clutching her child's blanket. It was my doing, Kunta said, stepping forward before she could open her mouth. I told her to go. Every head turned. Vaughn studied him, expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a thin, cruel thing. Of course it was you. Buckley shifted his weight. Let us make a lesson of him. Vaughn's gaze swept the gathered faces. Not yet. Lessons work best when stretched. Fear must ripen. He gestured toward Kunta. Put him on half rations. Double his workload. Then we see how long this Mandinka spirit lasts. As they dispersed, Fiddler hissed under his breath, You going to get yourself killed. Then I die as Kunta Kinte, Kunta said softly. Fiddler swallowed hard. You do not get it. They talk in the big house. Master Waller say you too much trouble. Vaughn want permission to remove you. How? Kunta asked. Make it look like you attacked patroller. Like Jared. Fiddler voice shook. They speak it plain. They call it a necessary loss. What Kunta did not know, what Fiddler barely grasped, listening from cracked doors and shadowed hallways, was that plans had already been drawn. Vaughn had spoken with patrollers under cover of night, their voices low and businesslike. If he dies in the woods, Vaughn said, we tell Waller he attacked us. The law will believe it. They always do when the dead is black. The patroller had nodded. We will take him on some pretense. Say we heard of runaways nearby. We will say we need the Mandinka's tracking skills. Good, Vaughn replied. Make sure no one else returns. The silent war had entered a new phase. They no longer wanted to break Kunta. They wanted him gone. And the night they chose to do it would be remembered only in whispers. The night when knives flashed in the dark and the truth died in the official records. The night they came for Kunta was warm, unnaturally warm for early autumn, and the air clung to the skin like damp cloth. Crickets shrilled from the grass. The moon hung low and swollen. To any outsider, it looked like another quiet night on Waller's plantation. But the enslaved felt it. A shift in the wind. A tightening in the earth. A heaviness that settled over the quarters like an omen. Fiddler sensed it first. He had been sitting outside the cabin, tuning his fiddle, pretending calm. But the notes came out strained, trembling. At last he set the bow down, wiped sweat from his brow and murmured, Something wrong tonight. Inside, Kunta lay awake on his cot, eyes open, listening. He too felt it, the unnatural stillness, the absence of Vaughn's usual pacing outside the barn, the distant whinny of horses being saddled at an hour no horse should be touched. Then he heard voices. Oh, urgent. Moving toward the quarters. Fiddler rose. Boy, he whispered sharply, stepping inside. Get up. Kunta sat up slowly. What is it? Fiddler eyes darted to the door. Patrollers. Vaughn with them. They not come this late unless something bad planned. As if to confirm the warning, the faint glow of lanterns appeared between the trees, bobbing toward the cabins. Boots crunched on gravel. A dog barked once, sharp, controlled, as if commanded to silence afterward. Kunta stood, shoulders squared. Fiddler grabbed his arm. Boy, please, don't do nothing foolish. If they call you out, don't fight. Not tonight. But Kunta did not respond. His mind had already sharpened into the dangerous calm warriors felt before a battle. He had sensed this coming for weeks. Rumors of his sale. Vaughn's whispering. The patrollers watching him with wolfish focus. He knew what this night was. A removal. A quiet killing disguised as justice. The door burst open without warning. Vaughn filled the frame, lantern raised, its light throwing sharp angles across his face. "Kunta," he said quietly, as if offering a choice he did not intend to honor, "you are to come with us." A patrol reported runaways nearby. His smile was thin. "We require your tracking skills." Fiddler stepped between them. "Sir, he ain't no tracker. He new to this land, he." Vaughn backhanded him with the lantern hand. Fiddler crashed into the wall, blood already on his lip. Kunta moved forward immediately, but 3 patrollers stepped in, rifles trained on his chest. Buckley entered next, smirking. "Funny, ain't it? African runs 3 times, but tonight he coming quiet." Kunta's jaw flexed. "I come because you force me." Buckley shrugged. "Quiet enough for me." Iron cuffs snapped around Kunta's wrists. The cold metal burned his skin. The patrollers dragged him out into the humid night air, past cabins where the enslaved watched silently from cracks in doorways, too afraid to speak. Amma clutched her blanket, whispering a prayer. Leja clenched his fists until his knuckles cracked. Even the children sensed death in the air. The patrollers marched Kunta toward the woods. Vaughn led them, lantern swinging, casting warped shadows on the ground. They traveled deeper, away from any trail, any witness, any hope. After 10 minutes, Vaughn stopped. "This far enough." 2 patrollers stepped forward. One drew a knife. The other cocked his rifle. Buckley looked almost relieved. "About damn time." Kunta stood tall, though his injured foot throbbed. The night wrapped around them, silent except for the insects. He looked at each man in turn, calm, steady. "You kill me," he said softly, "but you not kill my name." Buckley scoffed. "What good a name on a dead man?" Vaughn stepped closer, face inches from Kunta's. "Your name dies tonight because we will never speak it again." What none of these men knew, what none of them would ever understand, was that Kunta's name had already traveled beyond their reach. Men whispered it in the fields. Women sang it under their breath while cooking. Children carved it into the dirt. His defiance had become something larger than the man himself. And tonight, that truth would reveal itself. The patroller with the knife lunged. Before the blade reached Kunta's skin, a shape burst from the darkness. A flash of movement, desperate and fierce. Fiddler. He slammed into the man with the knife, knocking him to the ground. The lantern fell, flames sputtering. Chaos erupted. Buckley swung his rifle at Fiddler. Fiddler ducked, grabbed a fistful of sand and threw it into his eyes. Buckley howled, stumbling back. "Run, Kunta!" Fiddler shouted. But Kunta couldn't. His wrists were chained. His foot screamed in pain. And 3 patrollers surged toward Fiddler with murderous rage. One struck him across the head with a club. Fiddler staggered, coughing blood. Another raised a knife. Kunta roared, charging forward despite his restraints. He rammed his shoulder into the knife-wielding man. They both fell, rolling through leaves and dirt. The patroller's blade scraped Kunta's arm, leaving a shallow cut. But the chaos was brief. Buckley regained his sight. Vaughn steadied his pistol. The gunshot cracked the night open. Fiddler fell. Kunta froze, breath crushed inside his lungs. Fiddler lay on the ground, chest rising weakly, eyes glassy. Another gun cocked behind Kunta. "End him," Vaughn ordered. "Now." But something changed in that moment. Not in Kunta. In the patroller holding the gun. He looked at Kunta, at the blood, at the chains, at the defiance that refused to die. Then he glanced at Fiddler gasping on the ground. Something human flickered across his face. "Vaughn," he said quietly, "this ain't right." Buckley spat. "You grow a conscience now? I ain't shooting a chained man." Vaughn raised his pistol toward the hesitant patroller. "Then you join him." Before he could fire, the forest erupted with shouting. Leja. Oma. 3 others. They had followed. The patrollers panicked, assumptions shattering. Shots rang wildly. Lanterns fell. Flames sputtered. Figures clashed in the dark. The forest exploded into chaos. History would never record what happened accurately. White men would lie. Records would vanish. Official stories would claim African savagery, escape attempts, necessary force. But the truth was simple. They tried to kill Kunta Kinte that night, and the enslaved refused to let it happen. The forest swallowed everything, the gunshots, the screams, the truth. And by dawn, nothing on that plantation would ever be the same. Dawn revealed what the night tried to hide. The forest floor was scarred, broken branches, trampled leaves, spatters of blood half washed by dew. A torn piece of cloth clung to a bramble. Vaughn's shattered lantern lay on its side, glass glittering like cruel frost. Birds circled overhead, unnerved by the scent of gunpowder and fear. The patrollers limped back to Waller's plantation with a story already rehearsed. Africans ambushed us, Buckley insisted, clutching his bruised jaw. They tried to kill us, Vaughn added, voice calm, too calm. They escaped into the swamp. Waller listened with a growing tightness in his shoulders. And the Mandinka boy? Buckley swallowed. Ran during the confusion. It was a lie. A clumsy one. The kind that only men who believed the world would accept anything they said could risk telling. Kunta had not escaped. He had been dragged back by dawn, bleeding, half-conscious, wrists torn raw from struggling. Legia carried him part of the way. Amma walked behind them, eyes fierce, daring anyone to question her presence. When they reached the quarters, the enslaved gathered in tense silence. Some gasped when they saw Kunta's condition. Others looked toward the big house, already knowing the price that would be demanded. Fiddler lay in his cabin, drifting in and out of awareness. A bullet had grazed his ribs, leaving him fevered and weak. But he lived. For now. When Waller saw Kunta brought back alive, something inside him snapped. You defy me again and again, he said, stepping forward, cane trembling in his grip. And now you turn my plantation into a battlefield? Kunta lifted his chin despite the pain. I did not start the fight. You are the cause, Waller spat. You make the others bold. You make trouble where there was order. Fiddler, propped weakly against the doorframe, rasped, Sir. The patrollers. Waller cut him off with a vicious glare. I do not need instruction from an old fiddle player. He turned back to Kunta, eyes blazing with the fear only tyrants feel when their control begins to slip. You are no longer safe here, Waller said. Not for me. Not for my property. Not for my peace. Buckley smirked. Sell him. Fetch a good price. Waller inhaled sharply. Yes, sell him. Let another master break him. The decision was made in that moment, quietly, cruelly, permanently. Before noon, Kunta was loaded into a wagon, wrists chained, ankles shackled. The enslaved watched silently, unable to intervene. Amma wept openly. Legia bowed his head, fists clenched. When Fiddler tried to stand, pain tore through him. He reached out toward Kunta, voice cracking. Boy, hold fast. Do not let them take your name. Kunta met his gaze and nodded. I am Kunta Kinte. Waller heard the name and stiffened. Not anymore. The wagon rolled away. The journey south took days. Every bump in the road jolted Kunta's injured foot. Every mile carried him farther from the only allies he had found in America. But he did not lose himself. He whispered his name under his breath, over and over, like a prayer or a weapon. At last, they reached the plantation of William Murray, a man whose reputation for cruelty traveled faster than his wagons. Murray greeted the traders with a thin smile, his pale eyes scanning Kunta from head to toe. He saw the limp, the bruises, the unbroken posture. This is the Mandinka? Murray asked. Yes, the trader replied. Strong as any, but rebellious. Rebellion, Murray said softly, is simply untamed pride. Pride can be broken. He circled Kunta slowly. What is your name, African? Kunta stared straight ahead. Kunta Kinte. Murray's smile widened. No, that will not do. He gestured toward the yard where enslaved men chopped wood, hammered nails, hauled sacks. You will live as Toby here. Kunta did not speak. Murray's tone sharpened. Say it. Still, Kunta said nothing. Murray stepped closer until his face was inches from Kunta's. If you do not say your new name, I will take your tongue. And you will have no name at all. For a moment, the world held still. The sun beat down. Dust swirled in the air. A young enslaved boy carrying water froze in place, staring. Even the birds seemed to pause. Kunta whispered, I am Kunta Kinte. The whip cracked before the syllables finished leaving his lips. Murray delivered blow after blow, each one striking with the force of a man determined to erase a lineage with leather and rage. Kunta's knees buckled. Blood streaked his back. His breath came in ragged bursts. Say your name, Murray demanded. Kunta's voice trembled, but the words came again. Kunta Kinte. Murray struck him until he collapsed into the dirt, eyes glazed with pain, body barely holding together. Still the name lived. Watching from the shadows was a woman, a midwife named Belle. She had seen men broken before, seen their spirits snap like brittle wood under the weight of cruelty. But this Mandinka, something in him refused to bend. What Kunta did not know, what Murray could not comprehend, was that Belle would one day become the person who stitched his spirit back together piece by piece. For now, though, Murray had one last order. Chain him to the post. He will stay there until he understands he is Toby. The enslaved obeyed with shaking hands. They feared the master more than they feared disobedience. But their eyes lingered on Kunta with something that unsettled Murray. Not pity. Not shock. Admiration. Murray misread it as weakness. In truth, it was the first spark of a legacy he would never control. Because even chained to a post, half-conscious and bleeding, Kunta Kinte was not broken. Not yet. And not ever in the way Murray intended. For 3 days, Kunta hung chained to Murray's post, baking under the sun, trembling under the cold nights. His back burned with every breath. Flies gathered at the cracked wounds. His vision blurred in and out, drifting between fevered dreams of Juffure and the harsh reality of the plantation yard. Men passed silently, fearful. Women lowered their heads. Children stared with wide, frightened eyes. But one person did not stay silent. Well, she approached on the first evening, carrying a bucket of water. The overseer guarding Kunta raised a hand. Master said no water till he says his name. Bell looked him dead in the eye. Master said nothing about me washing the dirt off him. The overseer hesitated. Bell had a way of speaking that made even white men pause. She dipped a cloth in the water and gently touched it to Kunta's lips. His eyes flickered open. You gon' die out here if you stubborn, she murmured. Kunta rasped, voice shredded. I am Kunta Kinte. Bell exhaled through her nose. Ain't nobody here a skin you to forget who you is. She wiped blood from his shoulder. But you shout your truth too loud in a land built on lies. Kunta breathed shallowly. Master cannot take my name. Maybe not, Bell whispered, but he can take your life. Her touch was gentle, but her words cut him sharper than any whip. Yet he did not waver. She cared for him each night, quietly, secretly, defiantly. She brought water, hid bits of food, cleaned his wounds with herbs she smuggled from her garden. She worked as a midwife, trusted by the enslaved and tolerated by the whites. Her hands had delivered babies, tended sickness, comforted the dying. Now those same hands kept Kunta alive. On the 4th morning, Murray appeared with a riding crop. Ready to say it yet? Kunta's voice cracked from thirst and pain, but the words rose anyway. Kunta Kinte. A murmur rippled through the yard. Even some white workers shifted uneasily. Murray's jaw tightened. He swung the riding crop against the post beside Kunta's head, splintering it. Untie him, Murray snapped. Put him to work. As the chains loosened, Kunta collapsed onto the ground. Bell knelt beside him immediately, placing a steadying hand on his back. Slow, she said softly. You try standin', you fall and break something important. But Kunta pushed himself upright, refusing to let the earth swallow him. I stand, he muttered. Bell stared at him, half in awe, half in exasperation. You the most stubborn African I ever met. Kunta managed the faintest shadow of a smile. I hear that often. Days passed. Kunta healed slowly, limping through the fields, forcing his broken foot to hold his weight. He worked beside Bell often, helping her gather herbs along the creek or carry supplies to the cabins. She talked to him in a way no one else dared. You not the first African come here with pride, she told him one afternoon. But most choose to bend. They bend so they children survive. Kunta shook his head. If I bend, I die inside. Bell stopped walking. And what if you stay straight and get killed? What you leave behind then? Kunta didn't answer. He thought of his father. His mother. The village that was now a memory carved into him like a scar. Bell sighed. You fightin' battles ain't no single man ever won. Then many must fight, he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened. You different, she whispered. From that day forward, their bond deepened, not out of romance at first, but out of shared wounds, shared burdens, shared understanding. Bell was practical, wise, cautious. Kunta was proud, fiery, unyielding. Together, they formed a balance neither had expected. When he learned enough English to speak more fluidly, he asked her one night, Why you help me? Bell poked the fire with a stick. 'Cause you remind me what we supposed to be. Not these broken shells Murray try making us, but people with souls. Weeks turned to months. Bell's small cabin became the place where Kunta found something resembling peace. She taught him how to hide strength beneath silence. He taught her Mandinka words, laughter returning to his voice in rare moments. One night, under the soft glow of firelight, Bell rested beside him and whispered, You want a life with me or you want a war with them? Kunta reached for her hand. I want both, he said. That was the night they became husband and wife. not by any law a white man wrote, but by the vows whispered in their own tongues, sealed by breath and heartbeat. Months later, Belle placed his hand on her stomach. "Kunta," she said softly, "I'm with child." His breath caught. Slowly, wonderingly, he touched her belly. "A child?" he whispered. "Our child." Belle smiled. "Ain't you scared?" Kunta shook his head. "I give our child my name." Belle chuckled, leaning against him. "Then this place better be ready for another strong-willed Kinte." But Murray was not ready. When the overseers caught word Belle was pregnant, Murray summoned her, demanding to know the father. She refused to answer. Vaughn delivered the warning later, shadowed in the barn doorway. "Master Murray does not want African ways o' breeding. He says a woman with loyalty to her man makes her less obedient." Kunta's fists tightened. "He touch her?" Vaughn smirked. "Not yet. But he watching. Always watching." Kunta stepped forward. "I protect her." Vaughn raised an eyebrow. "That what you think? Protectin' here gets folk killed." Kunta didn't back down. Vaughn studied him for a long moment. "Your pride will kill the ones you love." He walked away. What Kunta did not know, what Murray had already planned, was that he intended Belle and her unborn child to become tools of control. And the child he hoped to raise as his own property would become the single most dangerous threat to his legacy. The child came into the world on a night of thunder. Rain battered the roof of Belle's cabin, wind rattled the shutters, and lightning flashed across the sky like veins of fire. Inside, Belle gripped the edge of the pallet, sweat pouring down her face as waves of pain tore through her. Women crowded the small space, hands steady, voices low, working in the ancient rhythm of birth that no whip could touch. Kunta knelt beside her, fingers laced with hers. "Breathe," he whispered. "You strong." Belle glared at him through clenched teeth. "You did this to me?" He almost laughed despite the fear lodged in his chest. "Then I stand with you till the end." Another contraction hit. Belle arched, teeth bared. The midwife barked instructions. "Push now. One more time." Belle screamed. Then a new sound entered the storm. A thin, outraged wail. The midwife lifted the tiny, squirming form into the lamplight. "A girl," she announced softly. "Healthy." Belle collapsed back, tears mingling with sweat. Kunta could not move at first. He stared at the child, this small, fragile thing with fists clenched as if ready to fight the world she'd been born into. Her skin was the color of polished walnut. Her eyes, when they opened, were dark and deep, searching. "Ours?" Belle whispered. "She ours." Kunta reached out, hands trembling, and took the baby into his arms. She fit there as if she had always been meant to. Something in his chest broke open. Something he had not known was still capable of tenderness. He bent his forehead to hers. "In Juffure," he murmured, voice thick, "we say a child is a promise to the ancestors." He looked at Belle. "I will give her a name worthy of them." Belle smiled weakly. "Then give it." "Kizzy," he said. "In Mandinka, it means stay put." His gaze hardened, a vow forming even as he spoke. No master will make her forget it. What Kunta did not know, what he could not yet imagine, was how bitterly that name would be tested. From the beginning, Kizzy was different. She watched everything just as her father did. She toddled between cabins, absorbing whispers, songs, stories. She learned the secret paths between the fields and the creek. When Belle carried her on her hip to deliver babies or tend the sick, Kizzy stared at the suffering with wide, solemn eyes, as if engraving it onto her soul. At night, Kunta sat her on his lap and spoke to her in Mandinka. "Say it," he coaxed gently. "Kunta Kinte." Kizzy lisped the sounds. "Kunta Kinte." He smiled. "Good. Now Juffure." "Juffure." Belle watched from the doorway, arms crossed, amused and worried all at once. "You gon' have that child talkin' in tongues ain't nobody here understand." Kunta shook his head. "She understand. That enough." Belle's smile faded slightly. "You think Master let her keep that?" Kunta's expression darkened. "He cannot take what I give her." Time, however, had its own plans. Kizzy grew. At 5, she ran through the fields with a scrap of cloth tied around her shoulders like a cape, shouting Mandinka words at the crows. At 7, she eavesdropped on the white children, memorizing their letters as they traced them in dusty air. At 9, she sat beside Kunta as he repaired harnesses, peppering him with questions. "Why they call you Toby?" she asked one evening. Kunta's hands stilled. "They call me that. But that is not my name." "What your name?" she insisted. He looked her in the eye. "Kunta Kinte." She repeated it carefully. "Kunta Kinte. Do not forget, he said. Even if they beat you. Even if they sell you. Your blood know who you are. The word sell snagged in her mind. They sell me, she whispered. Belle, listening from the shadows, flinched. Do not fill her head with fear. Kunta's gaze never left Kizzy. I fill it with truth. Belle stepped forward. Truth ain't always mercy. But Kunta had survived too much to believe in mercy as the world understood it. For him, love was truth and truth was preparation. And he had reason to fear. Murray watched Kizzy from the big house veranda as she grew. He saw the way she held herself, the quick intelligence in her eyes, the way she seemed to carry her father's defiance without his reckless visibility. She will be useful, he remarked to Vaughn one day. A girl who can think and obey is worth 3 dull boys. Vaughn nodded slowly. As long as she obeys. Murray smiled coldly. If she does not, we will correct her. Over the years, Kizzy's mind became a quiet battlefield between fear and knowledge. Belle taught her how to survive, when to speak, when to bow her head, when to swallow anger. Kunta taught her how to remember, names, stories, words that traced her lineage back to Africa. One night, when the moon hung sharp and thin, Kizzy lay between them, listening as Kunta spoke of rivers that shone like mirrors and trees that grew so big they swallowed the sky. Belle combed Kizzy's hair with gentle fingers. Will we ever go there? Kizzy asked. Kunta's voice softened. Maybe not with our feet, but with our stories. Belle's hands paused. Stories don't change chains. Kunta met her gaze. Stories change what chains cannot reach. For a time, it seemed possible that Kizzy might carve a space for herself in this brutal world. A space protected by her parents' love and her own quick mind. She assisted Belle with births. She carried messages between cabins. She overheard more than any child should and understood more than most adults could bear. And then one careless choice shattered everything. She was 14 when it happened. A friend, a young enslaved boy named Noah, confided in her his plan to run. He spoke in whispers, eyes blazing with the same fire Kunta had carried years earlier. I got a pass, Noah said, holding up the precious folded paper. I go north. I not come back. Who write it? Kizzy asked. I did, Noah said, cheeks flushing. Kizzy hesitated. She had taught him letters, traced in dust and ash behind the cabins. She knew what he risked. If they catch you, she began. I cannot stay, he said. You understand that. She did. All too well. So when he asked her to help hide the forged pass, she did not think of consequences. She thought of freedom, of rivers, of trees bigger than the sky. She hid the paper. The patrollers caught him anyway. They found the forged pass. They beat him until he confessed who had written the letters, who had helped him. He gave them Kizzy's name through split lips and broken teeth. The news traveled faster than any whisper. Murray's rage was cold, disciplined, deadly. A girl who writes passes, he said, voice icy. A girl who helps slaves run. He looked at Vaughn. She is a threat. What you gon' do? Vaughn asked. Murray's answer was simple. Sell her. Those 2 words shattered Kunta more completely than any whip ever had. Belle screamed when they came for Kizzy, clawing at the air, at the men, at fate itself. Kizzy fought too, kicking, sobbing, pleading not for her own life but for the right to stay with her parents. I not leave my father, she cried. Kunta burst from the cabin, chains still clinking on his ankle. 2 men held him back. He strained against them, muscles burning. Kizzy, he roared. Remember your name. She twisted in the traitor's grip, tears streaming. I am Kunta Kinte. Murray's face hardened. Not for long. As the wagon rolled away, dust swallowing the sound of her cries, Kunta fell to his knees. Something inside him broke then, not his spirit, but a piece of his heart that had believed, foolishly, that love might shield his child from the full cruelty of this land. Belle collapsed beside him, sobbing into the dirt. For hours neither moved. What the traitors did not know, what Murray for all his control could not see, was that as Kizzy disappeared over the horizon, she carried more than her own body into another man's property. She carried Mandinka words. She carried her father's defiance. She carried the memory of a name no master had yet succeeded in destroying. The sale of Kizzy was meant to be a punishment. Instead, it was a transmission. A seed scattered on blood-soaked soil. And decades later, when her grandson would sit and listen to stories of the African who would not bow, America would pretend it had never heard the name Kunta Kinte before. But the truth was already woven into its fabric. Written in blood. Carried in memory. Burned into the souls of those it tried to erase. In the months after Kizzy's sale, life on Murray's plantation did not return to normal, not in any real sense. A silence settled over the quarters, heavy as grave soil. Belle moved through her days like a ghost, eyes dimmed, steps slow. She ate little, slept less. The spark that had carried her through years of cruelty flickered weakly, as if each passing dusk pulled her further from the world of the living. Kunta worked because working was the only thing he could do. The chains on his ankle clinked with every step, a rhythm he had learned to ignore. His back bore scars. His foot burned with each stride. But none of that wounded him the way Kizzy's absence did. He often found himself walking toward Belle's cabin only to stop at the door, unable to enter. His grief had no words, and the English he had learned was insufficient for the kind of pain that reshaped a man's insides. Some nights he wandered to the old oak where he had once taught Kizzy to speak Mandinka. He sat beneath its branches, staring into the dark, whispering her name as if the wind might carry it to wherever she had been dragged. Kunta Kinte, he murmured. You still mine. What Kunta did not know, could not know, was that his daughter cried the same words into her pillow hundreds of miles away. Years passed. Belle died first. Quietly, softly. One morning she simply did not rise. Kunta held her body in his arms and felt something inside him shatter beyond repair. He buried her himself, digging deeply into the red earth with trembling hands, refusing help, refusing rest. When the grave was filled, he sat beside it until the moon rose, his face unreadable. With Belle gone and Kizzy stolen, the world felt hollow. Still Kunta lived. He taught new generations of enslaved children the stories of Juffure. He taught them Mandinka words whispered so softly that even the wind had to lean in to hear. He showed them how to carve memories into their souls so deeply no master could scrape them away. Some children laughed at the strange sounds. Some repeated them with reverence. Some forgot them within days. But one boy, young, wiry, curious, held on to every syllable. His name was George, Kizzy's son. Her child, born on another man's property, raised under another man's whip, shackled by another man's greed, but carrying his mother's fire and his grandfather's bones. The day Kunta learned George's name, he felt the world tilt. The lineage had not ended. The story lived. George visited whenever he could, sneaking across county lines, traveling at night, risking patrollers and dogs just to see the grandfather he had never known. Kunta would sit with him beneath the same oak where he had once held Kizzy's tiny fingers and whisper the words again. Kunta Kinte. George repeated them, stumbling at first. Kunta Kinte. Kunta smiled each time. Good. Remember. And George did. Kunta grew old. His hair whitened. His back stooped. But his name remained untouched, spoken less loudly now, but carried with an unbroken dignity. He died quietly, sitting beneath the oak tree, the setting sun turning the ground gold around him. They found him with his eyes open, as if he had been watching something far beyond the horizon. The enslaved buried him at the edge of the woods, marking the grave with stones. Some whispered Mandinka prayers Belle had memorized decades earlier. Others simply bowed their heads. George was not there. Distance and danger kept him away, but when he heard, he sat alone for hours, silent, absorbing the weight of a legacy he was now responsible for carrying. History, however, did not care. Records of Murray's plantation were altered, burned, or lost. Overseers told stories of a slave named Toby who had been difficult, rebellious, troublesome. They left out the name Kunta Kinte. They left out the Night of Knives. They left out the daughter sold for knowing too much. America built entire plantations on such omissions. But memory is stubborn. Memory crawls through the cracks of lies, clings to the tongues of children, hides in the hum of work songs, settles in the marrow of generations. Memory becomes something more powerful than any ledger or law. George grew old too. He passed the stories to his children, and they passed them to theirs. A chain of words, unbroken through decades of terror and hope. Your name, they whispered, is your first truth. And so it traveled. From George to his son. From that son to his children. From those children to a young man born nearly 2 centuries after Kunta's capture, who listened to the elders speak of a Mandinka warrior who refused to bow. His name was Alex Haley. He traced the stories backward, through plantations, through sales records, through whispers, until he found a place called Juffure. He traveled across the ocean, walked the same soil Kunta once ran upon, and listened as a griot recited a 200-year-old lineage. Kunta Kinte, the griot said, taken by slavers in 1767. And suddenly, the story America never wanted told surged back into the world. Not as fiction. As memory. As inheritance. as truth long buried and finally unearthed. Whether every detail is exact or softened by time does not matter. What matters is this. A man once stood on American soil and defied the entire system built to destroy him. A man kept his name when beaten, chained, and broken in body. A man carved a legacy so deep that it outlived the plantations, the overseers, the laws, the lies. Kunta Kinte, the African who would not bow, the ancestor who refused erasure, the spark that ignited generations. And even now, the ripple of his resistance remains. In every child who asks where they came from, in every voice that insists on truth, in every story that refuses to stay buried. Because history does not belong to those who wrote the ledgers. It belongs to those who survived them. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Kunta Kinte's defiance reshaped generations, or do you think his legacy was nearly forgotten forever? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe to the Slave Rebellion. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who believes forgotten voices must be heard. These stories matter. These voices matter. See you in the next video.